What's up, Limerick? Welcome to this Homeroom special. I'm Mr. Bale, government teacher and your election expert. If you were at Limerick last year, you might recall that I actually did a presidential election special for Homeroom, and here I am less than a year later. So why am I already back? Well, the answer is that we have a gubernatorial recall election.
A gubernatorial what now?
A gubernatorial recall election, what that means is essentially whether the California voters want to get rid of the current government before his or her term is out. So the first thing we want to do is understand why recalls? What's the history behind this? Let's take a look.
The progressives introduced a variety of reforms to the democratic system in the early 20th century. Now, one of those, of course, was the recall, which was introduced in California in 1911. But it should be noted that California readily embraced the other big ones, like the referendum and initiative. The total of 20 states have gubernatorial recalls. Now, while the progressive era is the time frame that we remember most of them being passed, this was actually a concept that was discussed as part of the United States Constitution's writing, although we did not go for it. The states in red here are states with gubernatorial recalls. There are, of course, 20 of them, but the ones in yellow are the ones that do not need a valid reason. What does that mean, valid? Usually it means either a criminal conviction or something like proving gross negligence. For the green states here, these are ones that have actually held recall elections in the course of them actually having these laws in the books. So only 3. And only of California and North Dakota of those 3 have actually removed a governor during the time period. So recalls in California since 1911, there have been 55 attempts to recall a governor, including every governor for the last 60 years. There's been 2 attempts that qualified for the ballot. In 2003, we recalled Gray Davis. In 2021, right now, we'll see what happens to Gavin Newsom.
So now that we know what a recall is, let's take a look at the actual ballot. Like anybody else, I get my ballot in the mail here. So let's actually take a look to see what actually is in here. Well, it's a very simple election. There's essentially only 2 things that we're actually asking. The current governor is Gavin Newsom. Should we recall him or should we not? The secondary thing that people are voting on is if we choose to recall him. Say we get 50% plus 1 of people that actually say the governor should be replaced. Well, we need to pick a replacement candidate. And that's where we get these individuals. As crazy as it may seem, all of these people are actually on the ballot for the same position. They're all running. So let's take a look. Who are some of these individuals that are running?
We have a crowded field of candidates, so I will dispense with the informal terrorizing and begin the questions.
Is this the political process? Because I'm here to get involved in it.
Silence!
John Cox ran for governor in 2018, losing to Gavin Newsom by over 20 points. He's been campaigning with his bear on the campaign trail. I guess because there's a bear on our flag? But that's a Kodiak, and that's a grizzly bear. They're different. Larry Elder is a conservative radio host and perhaps the most conservative person that's getting any polling in the race, much to the delight, actually, of some Democrats. Kevin Falconer is a former mayor of San Diego. We have Caitlyn Jenner, of course, the known television star. We have Kevin Kiley, a former assemblyman, and YouTube guy Kevin Paffrath. Let's not forget that we have a bunch of people like this hip-hop guy, this college student, this guy who said it would be great having a stoner in office. Yeah. This guy attended the January 6th insurrection. Her. This guy. Yeah, this guy. What's in the cup? Oh, and this guy is actually on the ballot, even though he dropped out because he recently had a heart attack.
Oh, snap!
And more than 30 more candidates. Basically, the reason is that it's very easy to get on the ballot. Get a couple people to sign, pay some money, you're in.
That may seem like a lot of people, but we've been here before. In fact, in 2003, we had another recall election. If you look back at that one, it gives us some understanding of what might potentially happen in this particular election. So let's take a look at that 2003 recall election.
My fellow Californians, this is not a recall, this is a total recall. And I've come back from the future to terminate Gray Davis and clean up Sacramento.
The recall election almost immediately became a circus, with over 150 people filing paperwork for a candidacy, and then ultimately 135 people actually making the ballot, including a golf pro, a sumo wrestler, an adult film star, a porn publisher, a tribal chairman, retired meatpacker, artist, several film directors, several comedians, a washed-up actor, and even a former baseball commissioner.
That's right, California. It's Judgment Day for Gray Davis. And if you know what's good for you, you'll vote Arnold for President of California. Thank you.
In the end, it was international movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger who was able to win the governorship after Gray Davis was recalled. Now, some people are quick to compare the 2021 with the 2003 recalls, but they actually aren't that similar. For one, Gray Davis was in very bad political shape, having an approval rating of about 30% after the Enron-led energy scandal was crushing the state. Schwarzenegger was able to capture almost 50% of the vote, in part because he was a celebrity, but also because he was a moderate, and he was able to entice a lot of Democrats over to his side. Now, he was also taking over for a moderate, so there wasn't that significant of a change. It should be noted that the state has gotten consistently more Democratic since 2003, but there's also some key notes of difference between Gray Davis and Gavin Newsom.
Common sense would indicate that if Governor Newsom is being recalled, his approval rating must be pretty low. But in fact, that's not necessarily the case. One of the things about a recall is that you can actually have a relatively small percentage of people actively call for the recall as long as the money's put up and they get the signatures, and even a popular governor could be recalled in this situation.
Suffolk University recently put out a job approval rating poll for Gavin Newsom and had him above water at 51%. That's a far cry from Gray Davis's 30%. Now, if you look at the California Constitution, Article 2, Section 14, you're going to see here that these are the things that are actually required for a recall. Now, proponents have 160 days to file signed petitions. This is the largest in the United States. The signatures that you need to be equal to 12% of the last vote for office. In this particular election, that means about 1.5 million signatures. Certainly not nothing, but also not the hardest thing to actually get on the ballot in a state where you have about 36 million people in it.
So with so many candidates, what's the outcome going to be? If the governor is recalled, who's actually going to win the governorship? Well, that's where it gets interesting. You don't need 50% to win the governorship. You just need the highest amount. So you could see very interesting scenarios like, say, this.
The second question becomes, who should replace him?
This means that Gavin Newsom must receive at least 51% of the vote to remain governor. But someone like Larry Elder, the GOP frontrunner, only needs to receive 15% of the vote to be elected.
The current leader in the polls is Larry Elder, the so-called sage from South Central. Now, why? Well, part of it is because the Democrats have deliberately not put a candidate on that they believe is a viable candidate for governor. They feel that people will then have to essentially choose between a Republican and retaining Governor Newsom. For the Republicans, they also have somewhat of an odd strategy because they haven't really gone around any candidate either. And as a result, there's a whole bunch of Republican candidates that potentially could be seen as viable, but since the Republican Party isn't pushing anybody, they're likely to spread them out.
So let's take a look at the polling right now. Here you can see that Larry Elder is clearly the favorite, going along and has really trajected up to about 20-30% depending on the actual date. Second, you have Paffrath, which is the leading Democratic candidate, and then you have Falconer and Cox behind him. In a state with so many Democrats, you might wonder, well, where are they? Well, the problem is that some of these polls, in fact, don't include a lot of Democrats. So you can see that Republicans leading in, for instance, this poll, and as we scroll down, we see once again Elder leading in this poll. That's because up to 40% of Democrats have not voted at all or will not vote at all for a candidate. They simply voted no and then left the second thing blank. So in the end, you could have really a bunch of candidates with less than 1% hogging up a decent percentage of this overall vote, but you're probably going to see a vote overall skewed towards Republicans, as the fact that many Democrats will not be voting on this second question, as is advised by the Democratic Party.
So what are the predictions? Well, I would say in general, most people that are following the race right now assume that Governor Newsom will probably not be recalled. There's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, in early polling, a lot of people liked to talk about the idea that there might be some aspect of Governor Newsom they didn't want, so they leaned towards a potential recall. But when faced with the prospect of a Republican replacing a Democrat and no other viable Democrats on the ballot, many Democratic voters, which outnumber Republicans in the state of California by a 2-to-1 basis, went back to the governor and said they didn't want the recall to happen. So while polling actually showed the recall to not recall being as close as 1% as of even say a month ago by some polling methods, these late-breaking polls that are happening in the last week have really shown the governor with up to a 20% win category in opposed recall versus confirmed recall. But don't misunderstand, elections can always be surprising. So the only thing we'll actually know on whether we retain the governor or we get a new governor is what will actually happen when the results are confirmed. So keep an eye out. We'll see what happens. Thanks for checking in with us today, and I will see you guys at the next election. Have a great day.